In this video, we're going to be looking at activity 3.1.4 while loops and if else structures using the VEX v5 testbed and VEX code v5. In part 4, we're going to look at building a program after being given some simple behaviors. And up to this point, we've been given a lot of example code to build. This time, we're going to take a look and see what simple behaviors and see if we can build the code on our own. So the first thing we want to take a look at are going to be these simple behaviors, A, B, C, and D under this number here. So when the limit switch is pressed, the left motor velocity responds to the potentiometer. When the limit switch is pressed and an object is found within the optical sensor or the distance sensor, only the right motor turns. Now it says not to have or, we just are going to choose one or the other for our situation. When the limit switch is not pressed, the motor should always be off. The program should loop indefinitely, waiting until the limit switch is pressed again. So I'm going to go ahead and move into VEX code v5. We already have part 4 set up. So the big thing that we need to start to look at is they say the program is going to loop indefinitely. So I'm going to grab a forever block and put that into our program, snap it to our event handler. Then I'm going to grab an if-else condition. So the big thing that I kind of pull away from the simple behaviors is that when the limit switch is pressed, it's going to do some actions. If not, it's going to turn everything off. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to sensing and have it set up where if the limit switch is pressed, we're going to do some actions inside of the if statement, but if not, then we're just going to go ahead and stop the motors. So I'm going to go ahead and drop those two in there first. I'm going to stop the left and right motor both. Now what I need to do is inside, so right now this is kind of the main control of turning on and off our motors. Is the limit switch pressed? If it isn't, then we want to make sure these are turned off. So then if the condition is true, it'll move into the if condition that we have set up. So I'm going to actually grab another if-else statement and I'm going to nest it inside of the first if condition with the limit switch being pressed. So if you notice, the second if-else is kind of indented farther to the right. So the farther right it is, the less it kind of gets checked. So actually, if the limit switch gets pressed, that's the first thing it's going to look for. If this is true, then it moves into the second if-else statement and checks those options there. So we're going to go ahead and build out in the sensing for our second if condition. So what I'm going to look for does the optical, I'm going to use the optical sensor as our device to check, because usually the distance sensor picks up, just about anything, especially in the area that I'm working in. So now I'm going to say, okay, does optical 2 find an object? And if it does, then we want to go ahead and say, it just says that we turn on the right motor. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that spin right motor forward. Doesn't say really where to go, forward or backward. You could change those settings, that's fine. It just says that we want it to turn. Now we want to go ahead and in else, so if the optical does not find an object, otherwise we want to go ahead and set the motor's velocity. I'm going to go down to sensing and grab the potentiometer sensing block to drop in there, so that way we can say, okay, we're going to set the velocity to whatever the potentiometer is reading at, and then we're going to go ahead and just spin the left motor going forward. So I'm going to build that code. In previous code, we would have put in maybe like a wait 1 second and stop motor for those. But actually, I'm going to see how this behaves first to see if we really need to add those in. So I'm going to download. I'm going to hit run. Now, if I press the limit switch, so I'm going to see that I really don't have anything happening. So, and then what it probably means is that our potentiometer is set at 0 and our optical sensor has not detected anything. So if I put my finger over it, there's my right motor turning forward. Once I take my hand away, notice how it goes through though, and it stays running. So now if I go over to my potentiometer and turn it on, both of these go through and turn on at the same time, and I get the variable speed control. But actually I want it to where only one of these turns on at a time. So maybe I need to go through and throw a stop motor. So else there I want to stop the right motor And then on this one at the top, I want to stop the left motor. So let's download and see if this fixes the issue. So now here's my button press. There's my right motor turning forward. If I take my hand away, now the motor stops. So it only runs whenever it detects an object. So just by adding in those two stop motor blocks. And each motor only runs at a time. So now I can control the variable speed, and even if I go through, and so here's the thing, you're going to notice that even though my left motor is running, whenever I detect an object, the right motor is going to take precedent. And then here, if I take my finger off the limit switch, they both turn off. So if I go through and do that, they both kill the motors. So when I go through and turn off the limit switch. So here's the thing to kind of look at in the code. The limit switch is what's controlling whether or not there's any power getting sent to the motors. Then, when you look at this, the if condition, the first thing that I have set up is what's going to overpower the else. So that's why when we put our hand, even though the left motor's running, when I put my hand over the optical sensor and cover it, then it's going to go through and it's going to run the motor, because that if condition, the first thing that shows up, is going to get override the else statement, and then the first if condition of the limit switch being pressed overrides that second if statement. So there's a definite hierarchy to how the program checks the various conditions, and just kind of being aware of that is going to be very useful. Alright, so that is part 4. We can go ahead and hit stop, and then while we got this code up, I'm gonna click on file and say save as. And I'm gonna go ahead and name this to be part 5A, because in part 5 we have 4 scenarios, and we're gonna move on to part 5A in the next video. So I'll go ahead and save this as part 5A. I can get rid of the code now. It'll still be saved in the part 4 program file, and we can go ahead and move on to our additional practice section for activity 3.1.4.